In the blistering heat of a suburban afternoon, where the air shimmered over manicured lawns and the hum of cicadas drowned out reason, a piercing question sliced through the quiet. What if your neighbor wasn't who you thought they were? The cul-de-sac of Willow Grove, a pristine enclave of pastel houses and whispered gossip, held its breath as Karen Whitaker's voice shattered the calm. He's got my car. That man stole my McLaren, she shrieked into her phone. Her words a siren's wail to 911, pointing a trembling finger at the open garage of 214 Willow Lane. Inside, Marcus Ellis, a black man in a faded t-shirt, froze mid-step, a wrench in his hand, his face a mask of disbelief as he stared at the woman unraveling on his driveway. Karen, her blonde hair a chaotic halo, stood defiant, her eyes wild with accusation. The garage door, half-raised, framed Marcus like a stage spotlight, his every move now a performance for a neighborhood that had already begun to judge. The street, usually a tableau of predictable routines, kids on bikes, sprinklers hissing, had morphed into a theater of chaos. Neighbors peeked through blinds, their curiosity a silent chorus to Karen's escalating tirade. I saw it. I know it's mine, she insisted, her voice cracking as she clutched her phone like a lifeline. Marcus, a mechanic who'd moved in 3 months ago, had barely unpacked his life before it was dissected by Karen's call. His garage, a sanctuary of tools and half-repaired engines, now felt like a cage. He raised his hands, not in surrender but in a plea for clarity. Ma'am, I don't know what you're talking about, he said, his voice steady but laced with the weight of 1,000 unspoken defenses. Karen's eyes narrowed, her certainty a blade. Don't lie to me. I saw the car in there, she spat, pointing to the shadowed corner of his garage where a tarp covered something large, its shape vague but enough to fuel her conviction. The 911 operator's voice crackled through Karen's phone, calm but urgent, asking for details she couldn't provide. It's a McLaren red mine. He's hiding it, she shouted, her words tumbling over each other. Marcus took a step forward, his hands still raised, his voice softer now, almost pleading. I fix cars for a living. That's a client's project, not yours. But Karen wasn't listening. Her world had narrowed to the certainty of her loss. A McLaren, her pride, gone missing 2 weeks ago from her gated community 3 miles away. The police were on their way, their sirens a distant wail, and Marcus felt the ground shift beneath him. He'd seen this script before, played out in headlines and hushed stories, where innocence had to scream to be heard. As the first patrol car rounded the corner, its lights flashing like a warning pulse, the tension thickened. Karen's accusations grew louder, her gestures wilder, as if volume could cement her truth. Marcus stood rooted, his heart pounding, knowing every word, every move would be weighed against him. The neighbors' whispers grew into murmurs, their phones now filming, capturing the scene for a world that loved to judge first and ask later. Under the unrelenting sun, the cul-de-sac was no longer a haven but a courtroom, and Marcus was already on trial. The tarp in his garage, innocent to him, was now a symbol of something far larger, a spark in a powder keg of mistrust. The officers stepped out, their faces unreadable, hands resting near their holsters. Karen rushed toward them, her voice a torrent of indignation. He's got it. I know he does, she cried, pointing at Marcus, who stood still, his wrench now on the ground, his hands open like a book waiting to be read. The lead officer, a woman with sharp eyes, glanced between them, her radio crackling with updates. Let's all calm down, she said, her tone a thin thread holding back the chaos. But calm was a luxury Marcus couldn't afford. He knew the weight of Karen's words, the way they could twist a life into a headline. As the officer approached his garage, Marcus's mind raced. What was under that tarp? A client's old Mustang, half restored, not a McLaren. But would that matter when suspicion had already drawn its verdict? The neighborhood held its breath as the officer lifted the tarp, revealing rusted fenders and a skeletal frame. A car, yes, but nothing like Karen's sleek, stolen prize. Karen's face faltered, her certainty cracking, but she doubled down. He's hiding it somewhere else, she insisted, her voice now a desperate edge. Marcus exhaled, but the relief was fleeting. The officer's gaze lingered on him, not Karen, as if the truth needed more proof than her unraveling story. The sirens faded, but the tension didn't. Marcus knew this wasn't over. Not for him. Not for a man whose every day was a negotiation with a world quick to assume the worst. The cul-de-sac pulsed with a restless energy, the air thick with the aftershocks of Karen's accusation. Marcus stood by his garage, his hands still raised, a gesture that felt less like peace and more like survival. The officer, Sergeant Elena Ruiz, her badge glinting under the fading sun, scribbled notes on a pad, her eyes darting between Marcus and Karen. The tarp lay crumpled on the garage floor, exposing the Mustang's rusted truth, but Karen's voice still carried the weight of conviction. "He's hiding it." "I know he is," she insisted, her face flushed, her hands flailing toward the house as if secrets lurked behind every window. Marcus felt the eyes of the neighborhood boring into him, each stare a silent question. "What else are you hiding?" Sergeant Ruiz turned to Marcus, her expression neutral but her posture rigid. "Mind if we take a look inside?" she asked, her tone polite but unyielding. Marcus nodded, his throat tight. "Go ahead," he said, stepping aside, his heart a drumbeat of dread. He knew his house held nothing but tools, takeout containers, and a life still settling into new roots. But he also knew how truth could bend under the weight of suspicion. As the officers moved toward his front door, Karen trailed them, her phone still clutched like a weapon, filming every step. The neighbors, emboldened now, edged closer, their whispers a low hum of judgment. Inside, the house was sparse but orderly. A couch, a TV, a workbench cluttered with engine parts. Marcus followed the officers, his every step measured, aware that a wrong move could escalate everything. Ruiz scanned the living room, her partner checking closets, their boots heavy on the hardwood. Karen hovered at the threshold, her eyes darting, searching for the vindication she craved. "It's here somewhere," she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. Marcus caught her gaze, and for a moment, he saw not just anger but fear of being wrong, of losing the narrative she'd built. He wanted to speak, to ask why she'd zeroed in on him, but silence felt safer. Then came the twist, sharp and unexpected, like a crack in the pavement. Ruiz's partner, Officer Daniels, emerged from the back room holding a small, silver key fob with a logo Marcus didn't recognize. "Found this on a shelf," Daniels said, his voice flat but his eyes sharp. Karen's gasp was immediate, her hand flying to her mouth. "That's mine. That's the key to my McLaren," she cried, her voice trembling with triumph. Marcus's stomach dropped, his mind racing. He'd never seen that fob before. He fixed cars, not stole them. But the room felt smaller now, the walls closing in as Karen's accusation found new fuel. I told you he took it," she shouted, pointing at Marcus, her voice a blade slicing through the air. Marcus shook his head, his voice steady despite the chaos. "That's not mine. I don't know how it got here." But the officers exchanged a glance, and Marcus felt the shift, the moment when doubt hardened into something more dangerous. Ruiz held up a hand, her voice calm but firm. "Let's take this one step at a time. Mr. Ellis, can you explain this?" Marcus opened his mouth, but the words felt hollow even to him. He repaired cars for clients across the city, some of whom dropped off parts or tools. Could one of them have left the fob? His mind scrambled for answers, but the truth felt fragile against Karen's certainty and the officer's scrutiny. Outside, the neighbors' murmurs grew louder, their phones still recording, turning Marcus's life into a spectacle. Karen's voice rose again, recounting her story to anyone who'd listen. How her McLaren vanished, how she'd seen Marcus working late in his garage, how she knew he was hiding something. The key fob, small and gleaming, was now the centerpiece of her narrative, a prop in a drama she'd scripted. Marcus felt the weight of every eye, every lens, knowing that this moment, this misunderstanding could define him. As Ruiz bagged the fob as evidence, Marcus's mind churned. He hadn't stolen anything, but proving it would be a battle he wasn't sure he could win. The air in Marcus's living room was suffocating, the walls echoing with the weight of Karen's accusations and the officer's measured questions. The silver key fob, now sealed in a plastic evidence bag, sat on the coffee table like a loaded gun. Karen stood by the door, her arms crossed, her eyes blazing with a mix of triumph and fury. "I knew it," she said, her voice lower now, almost smug. You can't hide the truth forever. Marcus, standing in the center of his own home, felt like an intruder, his life dissected under the fluorescent glare of suspicion. Sergeant Ruiz, her notepad still in hand, fixed Marcus with a look that wasn't hostile but wasn't kind either. Mr. Ellis, we need to understand how this fob ended up here, she said, her tone a tightrope between procedure and doubt. Marcus's mind raced, piecing together fragments of the last few weeks. He'd been working on a dozen cars, each job a blur of oil and metal. Clients came and went, some leaving keys, others dropping off parts. I don't know, he said, his voice steady but strained. I fix cars. People leave stuff. Maybe someone dropped it off with the job. Daniels, the younger officer, raised an eyebrow, his hand resting on his radio. You don't know what's in your own house? He asked, the question sharp enough to cut. Marcus met his gaze, refusing to flinch. I know I didn't steal anything, he said, each word deliberate, a shield against the growing tide of doubt. Outside, the cul-de-sac had become a stage. Neighbors now openly gathered on lawns, their phones a constellation of lenses capturing every moment. Karen stepped onto the porch, addressing the crowd like a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. He's been acting suspicious since he moved in, she declared, her voice carrying across the street. Working late, keeping that garage locked. I knew something was off. The words landed like punches, each one twisting the narrative tighter around Marcus. He wanted to shout back, to demand proof, but he knew better. Anger would only make him look guilty. Instead, he turned to Ruiz. Can I show you my client logs? I keep records of every job. Ruiz nodded and Marcus led her to his workbench, where a battered notebook held the details of his work. Names, dates, car models. He flipped to the last month, pointing to entries for the Mustang in his garage and others. See? No McLaren, he said, his finger tracing the pages. Ruiz scanned the list, her expression unreadable, but Daniels lingered by the coffee table, his eyes on the fob. We'll need to verify this, Ruiz said, jotting down names. And we'll need you to come to the station for a statement. Marcus's heart sank, but he nodded. He'd done nothing wrong, but innocence felt like a flimsy defense in a room thick with suspicion. Then came another twist, subtler but no less jarring. As Ruiz flipped through the notebook, she paused, her finger on a name. James Whitaker. Marcus froze. Whitaker was Karen's last name. This your husband? Ruiz asked Karen, who'd returned to the room, her face still flushed with righteousness. Karen's eyes widened, her confidence faltering for a split second. Yes, she said, her voice quieter. Why? Ruiz held up the notebook. He's listed here. Dropped off a car for repair 2 weeks ago. Marcus's mind reeled. He vaguely remembered James, a quiet man who'd brought in a vintage Corvette, paying in cash and leaving quickly. Could he have left the fob? The room seemed to tilt, the pieces of the puzzle shifting in ways Marcus couldn't yet grasp. Karen's face hardened again, her certainty snapping back. That doesn't prove anything, she said, but her voice wavered, a crack in her armor. Marcus felt a spark of hope, but it was fleeting. The officers exchanged another glance, and Ruiz tucked the notebook under her arm. We'll take this too, she said. As they escorted Marcus to the patrol car for questioning, the neighbors' whispers grew louder, their phones still filming, turning his walk into a public execution. Karen watched, her triumph tainted by the shadow of her husband's name, a detail she couldn't yet explain. For Marcus, the cul-de-sac was no longer just a street. It was a battlefield, and the war was far from over. The police station was a sterile maze of fluorescent lights and muted voices, each click of a keyboard amplifying Marcus's unease. He sat in a small interrogation room, the metal chair cold against his back, his hands folded tightly to keep them from shaking. Across from him, Sergeant Ruiz leaned forward, her notebook open, the silver key fob now a centerpiece on the table between them. Let's go over this again, Mr. Ellis, she said, her voice calm but probing. You say you don't know how this fob ended up in your house, but it's got Karen Whitaker's prints on it, and it matches her stolen McLaren. Marcus's breath caught, his mind grappling with the impossible. His prints? Her prints? He hadn't touched the fob, but the truth felt like sand slipping through his fingers. "I fix cars," Marcus said, his voice low but firm. "People leave things. That fob could have come from anyone." He leaned back, trying to read Ruiz's expression, but her face was a mask of professionalism. Daniel stood by the door, his arms crossed, his silence louder than any question. The room felt like a trap. Each word Marcus spoke a potential misstep. He thought of the notebook, now in evidence, with James Whittaker's name scrawled in his own handwriting. Could James have planted the fob? The idea felt absurd, but so did this entire nightmare. Marcus's life, his quiet routine of wrenches and oil changes, had been hijacked by a woman's accusation and a single piece of evidence he couldn't explain. Back at Willow Grove, Karen paced her living room, her phone buzzing with messages from neighbors. The cul-de-sac's group chat was ablaze with speculation, some defending her, others questioning her certainty. "He's guilty," she texted back, her fingers trembling. But James's name in Marcus's notebook gnawed at her. She hadn't told the police about James's Corvette, hadn't thought it mattered. Now it felt like a loose thread in her carefully woven story. She called James, her voice sharp. "Why was your name in his book?" she demanded. On the other end, James hesitated, his voice muffled. "I just needed a tune-up, Karen. Didn't think it was a big deal." But his tone was off, evasive, and Karen's stomach twisted. She hung up, her certainty fraying like an old rope. At the station, the confrontation escalated. Ruiz slid a photo across the table. A red McLaren, sleek and unmistakable, recovered from a chop shop across town that morning. "This is Mrs. Whittaker's car," she said. "Found today nowhere near your place. But this fob was in your house. Care to explain?" Marcus stared at the photo, relief warring with confusion. The car wasn't in his garage, never had been. But the fob's presence was a riddle he couldn't solve. "I don't know," he said again, his voice cracking. "Someone must have left it there." Ruiz's eyes softened just a fraction, but she pressed on. "We're running prints on the fob. If yours are on it, this gets complicated." The twist deepened as Ruiz's phone buzzed with an update. She stepped out, leaving Marcus with Daniels, whose stare felt like a weight. When Ruiz returned, her expression had shifted. Less doubt, more curiosity. "The fob has 2 sets of prints," she said. "Karen's and someone else's. Not yours." Marcus exhaled, a rush of relief, but the question lingered. "Whose prints?" Ruiz didn't elaborate, but she asked about James Whittaker again, her tone sharper. Marcus recounted the Corvette job, James's quick visit, his cash payment, his haste to leave. The pieces were starting to align, but the picture was still blurred. As Marcus was released pending further investigation, he stepped into the night, the air cool against his skin. The cul-de-sac awaited, its judgment unyielding. Karen at home stared at her phone, the group chat now quieter, the neighbors' support wavering. James hadn't come home yet, and his silence was louder than her accusations. Marcus, walking back to his house, felt the weight of the fob's mystery, knowing the truth was close but still out of reach. The battle wasn't over, but the tide was turning, and he could feel it. Marcus's house felt different now, its walls no longer a sanctuary but a stage where his life had been put on trial. The cul-de-sac was quiet, the neighbors' lights dim, but their judgment lingered like a fog. He sat at his workbench, staring at the empty space where his notebook had been, his mind replaying the day's chaos. The key fob, the police, Karen's accusations, it all circled back to James Whittaker, a man Marcus barely knew but whose name now loomed large. He pulled up his client records on his laptop, scrolling through emails, searching for any clue about James's visit. A single line stood out. Payment received, Corvette, cash, no receipt requested. It was odd but not incriminating. Still, Marcus's gut told him there was more. Across the street, Karen's house was a fortress of tension. She sat at her kitchen table, her phone dark, James still not home. The group chat had gone silent, the neighbors retreating into their own doubts. Karen's certainty, once a blazing fire, was now a flicker. She replayed her confrontation with Marcus, the tarp, the fob, James's name in the notebook. She'd called 911 on instinct, driven by the loss of her McLaren, But now the pieces didn't fit. She texted James again, her words sharp. "Where are you? We need to talk." No reply. Her fingers hovered over the screen. Then she dialed Sergeant Ruiz. "I want to know about the prince," she said, her voice tight. Ruiz was curt. "We're still processing. But we're looking at everyone, Mrs. Whitaker. Including your husband." The revelation hit Karen like a slap. James, her quiet, predictable husband, who'd always faded into the background of her life. She thought of his late nights, his vague excuses, the Corvette he'd taken to Marcus without telling her. Her mind spiraled, the narrative she'd built against Marcus crumbling under the weight of new questions. She stormed to their garage searching for something, anything, to explain the unease gnawing at her. Among James's tools she found a receipt, crumpled and forgotten, from a repair shop across town. The date matched the day her McLaren vanished. Her breath caught, her hands trembling as she realized the truth was closer than she'd wanted to admit. At the station, Ruiz and Daniels pored over the evidence. The fob's second set of prints belonged to James Whitaker, a match confirmed just hours ago. They traced his Corvette to the same chop shop where Karen's McLaren was found, a connection too tight to be coincidence. Ruiz called Marcus, her voice steady but urgent. "We need you to come back in. It's about James Whitaker." Marcus arrived, his exhaustion battling a flicker of hope. Ruiz laid it out. James had ties to the chop shop, a side hustle moving stolen cars. The fob in Marcus's house? Likely planted to shift suspicion. Marcus's relief was tempered by anger, not at James, but at the system that had let Karen's accusation run wild. The confrontation came swiftly. Police knocked on Karen's door, James now home, his face pale as they read him his rights. Karen stood frozen, her world collapsing as the man she trusted was led away in cuffs. "Why?" she whispered, but James wouldn't meet her eyes. The neighbors watched, their phones down now, their whispers replaced by stunned silence. Marcus, standing on his porch, saw it all, his heart heavy but unbowed. He'd been vindicated, but the cost was etched in every stare, every whispered rumor that would linger. Karen's accusation, once a wildfire, had burned itself out, leaving only ash. She sat alone in her house, the weight of her mistake crushing her. Marcus across the street began to rebuild, his tools in hand, his resolve stronger. The cul-de-sac would never be the same, but neither would he. He'd faced the storm and walked through it, scarred but standing. The morning sun rose over Willow Grove, casting long shadows across lawns that no longer felt pristine. Marcus stood in his garage, the Mustang's frame gleaming under fresh paint, a small act of defiance against the chaos of the past days. The cul-de-sac was quieter now, the neighbors retreating into their homes, their curiosity sated but their guilt unspoken. Marcus's phone buzzed with a message from a client, a reminder of the life he was determined to reclaim. He'd been cleared, the truth about James Whitaker laid bare, but the scars of Karen's accusation lingered. Every creak of his garage door felt like a challenge, every glance from a neighbor a question he'd already answered. Karen, meanwhile, sat in her living room, the curtains drawn, her world reduced to the hum of her own thoughts. James was in custody, his confession a slow unraveling of a life she thought she knew. He'd been skimming cars for months, using Marcus's shop as a scapegoat when Karen's McLaren became a liability. The fob, planted during his Corvette drop-off, was meant to deflect suspicion, but it had backfired, exposing his own guilt. Karen's hands shook as she scrolled through the group chat, now silent, her neighbor's support replaced by awkward avoidance. She'd been so sure, so righteous, and now she was alone, her accusation a mirror reflecting her own flaws. Marcus walked to the station one last time, his client logs returned, his name cleared. Sergeant Ruiz met him at the door, her expression softer now. "You handled this better than most," she said, handing him his notebook. Marcus nodded, his throat tight. "Didn't feel like I had a choice," he replied, his voice carrying the weight of every moment he'd spent proving his innocence. Ruiz hesitated, then added, "Karen's been asking to talk to you. She's struggling." Marcus's jaw tightened. He wasn't ready for that conversation, not yet. The wound was too fresh, the trust too broken. Back at Willow Grove, Karen forced herself to step outside. her eyes fixed on Marcus's house. She'd rehearsed an apology, but the words felt hollow, inadequate against the damage she'd caused. She crossed the street, her steps tentative, her heart pounding. Marcus was in his garage, his back to her, focused on the Mustang. She cleared her throat and he turned, his eyes meeting hers. For a moment neither spoke, the air thick with unspoken pain. "I'm sorry," Karen finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was wrong. About everything." Marcus studied her, his expression unreadable. "I know," he said simply, his tone neither forgiving nor accusing. It was enough to make Karen flinch, the weight of her mistake heavier than ever. She turned to leave, but Marcus's voice stopped her. "Why me?" he asked, the question raw, unguarded. Karen froze, her eyes glistening. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I was scared, angry, I just saw you and thought." She trailed off, unable to finish. Marcus nodded, his gaze steady. "You saw what you wanted to see," he said, not cruelly but with a truth that cut deeper than anger. Karen nodded, tears falling, and walked away, her shadow long and heavy on the pavement. Marcus turned back to his work, his hand steady on the wrench. The cul-de-sac might never fully trust him, but he trusted himself. That was enough. He'd rebuild, one bolt at a time, his life a testament to resilience in the face of a world too quick to judge. The days stretched into weeks, and Willow Grove settled into an uneasy calm. Marcus's garage hummed with activity, his clients returning, their trust in his skill outweighing the neighborhood's lingering whispers. He worked late, the glow of his workbench a beacon in the night, a quiet rebellion against the shadow Karen's accusation had cast. Each repaired engine, each satisfied customer, was a brick in the wall he built around his life, fortifying it against the past. He didn't speak of the incident, but it lived in the lines of his face, the set of his shoulders, a reminder that innocence had to be fought for, not assumed. Karen's house, once a hub of cul-de-sac gatherings, stood quiet, its windows dark. She'd stopped attending HOA meetings, her absence a silent admission of guilt. The neighbors, once her chorus, now spoke of her in hushed tones, their sympathy laced with judgment. She spent her days replaying the moment she'd called 911, the certainty that had felt so right now a poison in her veins. She wrote a letter to Marcus, words spilling onto the page. Regret, shame, a plea for forgiveness, but she never sent it. It sat on her desk, a confession to herself, a mirror she couldn't look away from. One evening as the sun dipped low, painting the cul-de-sac in hues of gold, Marcus stepped outside, a toolbox in hand. A group of kids rode by on bikes, their laughter a reminder of the life he'd fought to keep. One of them, a girl with braids, waved at him and he waved back, a small smile breaking through. The neighborhood wasn't perfect, but it was his. He'd chosen to stay, not out of defiance but because running wasn't his way. He'd faced Karen's accusation, the police, the neighbors' stares, and come out stronger, not unscarred but unbroken. Across the street, Karen watched from her window, her heart heavy but stirring with something new. She'd lost more than her car, her pride, her certainty, her place in the community, but she was starting to see the cost of her assumptions. She picked up the letter, her fingers tracing the words, and made a decision. She walked to Marcus's mailbox, slipping the envelope inside, her hands trembling but resolute. It wasn't enough, not yet, but it was a start. She'd spend the rest of her days proving it, to Marcus, to herself, to the world she'd misjudged. Marcus found the letter later, reading it under the dim light of his garage. Karen's words were raw, unguarded, a map of her regret. He folded it carefully, tucking it into his notebook, not as forgiveness but as a reminder, of her mistake, of his strength, of the fragile line between truth and assumption. He looked out at the cul-de-sac, its houses glowing in the dusk, and felt a quiet resolve. He'd keep fixing cars, keep living, keep proving that a man's worth wasn't defined by the accusations thrown at him, but by the life he built in their wake. The neighborhood would move on, its scars fading but never gone. Marcus would too, his hands steady, his heart open, a man who'd faced the fire and walked through it, not just surviving but thriving. The cul-de-sac, once a battlefield, was now a canvas and Marcus was painting his future, one moment at a time. End.